Okay, I'm back on the Techsew 4100 stitching machine, and I've removed the shuttle race and the shuttle from the bobbin area, and I've taken the cover off of the head on the top, and I had pointed out in some previous videos that I've been having some binding issues. I did go and get a extendable oiling sewing machine oiler, and that did seem to have helped out with quite a bit, because I could reach some stuff that I was unable to reach before and get it better lubricated. Unfortunately, I do still have some binding. Now that I've had all of the bobbin case and shuttle removed, the binding is no longer occurring in the bottom, so that kind of tells me I probably need to replace those components, and hopefully I don't have tolerance issues with the bottom section here. We'll see what happens when I replace it. The other section that I thought I had binding was this spring, and it does not seem as though the spring is really causing a bunch of issue right now. Somebody had suggested that this shaft was binding somehow because it was bent. I don't know if that's happening or not. There's a block on the bottom underneath this support block for the spring. This block is attached to the lifting mechanism, and that's what, when you step on it, tends to release the binding from the upper section. I've discovered I can actually cause that binding to happen on a regular basis simply by squeezing the two presser feet together when it's rotating. So if I just pinch these two together and I begin to rotate, you can hear already squeaking. And on a pretty regular basis, it takes a little bit of effort, but you can get it to bind, and there it is. And it always binds as the needle is being drawn back up into the head. And once again, as always, if you want to release that tension, you step on the release presser foot release pedal. Conversely, you can use the lever on the top, give it a lot of effort, and there you go. Releases the tension. Of course, now then it's easy to use, and the hand wheel rotates freely. If you don't pinch those two together, then you can probably get 6, 7, 8 rotations out of it before it binds. And it doesn't typically bind when you're running it with the motor, because the motor can drive it past that binding issue pretty readily. But what does happen then is these presser feet tend to hop, and so I'm going to have to figure out what's going on there. I did get a set of hex wrenches and some screwdrivers. Mine are unfortunately not here. They're in another city right now, so I picked some up, and I'll be adjusting some of these arms here. My understanding is from the owner's manual and from some suggestions online that adjusting those will adjust these feet, and I may need to remove these blocks and make sure they're not twisted and maybe worn unevenly on the inside. And if they're in any bad sort of condition, I'll need to replace them. The block here does not appear to have a bushing in it. The case, however, does have a bushing going through it. And the presser foot the center presser foot going through this block also does not have a bushing on it. And if I get around here, this little block right here, I don't know if you can see it or not. It looks like you can. It also does not have a bushing on it. They all run just through whatever this cast material is right here, and goes from there. Now, one other thing I've discovered it can do to release that binding, let's create it again. There we go, a little bit of binding. If I remove the presser foot tension spring, that will typically expose rod on the top of the case. A couple seconds. The rod's exposed, and that rod would be this rod that the spring rides up and down. And if I push that spring from the top in that direction, it generally will release it. Now also what's happening is I think this block right here rotates a little bit counterclockwise, and this roller right here then gets pushed up hard against this guide, and this is a replaceable smooth guide. And the roller does normally spin. In this case it's not spinning anymore and it's bound up against there. So I'm going to push against that rod up top and see if I can get it to release. There we go. And actually I'm mistaken. You pull it towards the operator on the machine, and that's what gets it to release. And guess what? Boom. Easy to rotate again. So that's where it's at. I'm going to work a little bit on this arrangement here, and I'll add to the video at a later time. Carrying on, I've discovered, so if you loosen this nut here with the needle bar in the lowest position, this will obviously let you adjust the height, the presser foot, and this is pretty easy to move, doesn't seem to bind up. You know, even if I kind of push on a little bit, I can still get it to move fairly freely. So I don't think that's causing the problem. So let me give it a little bit of a snug up again here. However, I've discovered if I pull out the presser foot lifter's return spring there, the other section, this rear presser foot, does not move freely. It does bind up pretty easily, and doesn't seem to take much of pushing it in either one direction or the other to get it to bind. You'd think it would fall pretty readily on its own accord, but it will not. You can actually tweak it. The other thing you can see here is it's actually got quite a bit of play there. In my opinion, I wouldn't think that you would want this thing to be moving around quite this much. I don't know if it's obvious how much it moves there. Wouldn't think that that would move a whole lot. So I believe the bushing that runs through the case from the inside to the outside probably needs to be replaced. Hopefully that will help with the guiding of that rod and keep it from moving a bunch and binding. And that kind of fits with what I saw earlier, where this roller was binding up against this guide on the case. I don't believe it's actually the roller binding on the guide. Yeah, pretty easy to get it stuck. I think it's the bar binding and the bushing. There we go. I've been talking about the presser feet jumping on this 4100 machine on several videos, and I've been playing around here a little bit with the presser foot lifter adjustment. I thought I would illustrate just a little bit this presser foot jumping issue that I had been seeing, since it's quite evident right now. I have the power on, so let me go ahead and run it for a second and maybe see what's going on. There you go. And there's the issue. It's not operating smoothly at all. Now you can adjust it out to where the outer rear presser foot does not move up and down at all, in which case no more binding in this area. Unfortunately, you need that presser foot to lift. So what's happening is this little bar right here is creating a cam action, to where when the inner center presser foot hits bottom, it reaches the top of its cam action. This bar here is vertical, and as this continues to go that way, it will then create a lever action and try to lift the block that's bolted then to this bar and pull it through that bushing. Well, when that action's going on, you can clearly see that it's binding and not in a good way. So if there's a solution out there for that, certainly like to know. I'm still leaning towards this bushing. I know some folks had suggested that I unscrew this and try to see if it'll adjust in a different direction. Again, from what I can tell, there's quite a bit of play in there. So I'm not sure that that's the issue. Alright, I've removed the assembly off the front here. This is the cam action that raises and lowers the presser feet. And I just recorded this rear bar hopping on me. Got to thinking about it some more, about that center bushing that it rides on in here. So I removed the cover plate over that. Slightly loosened that set screw. See what kind of an end effect I would have. And here's where I ended up. Instead of it binding, it falls a lot easier now. Doesn't even have a spring on it to push it down. I took the spring off of the bar, and so let's see. When I button it back up, I'll do a little bit more looking in here before I do that. We'll see when I button it back up what kind of end effect I have. Alright, put it back together again. I adjusted very slightly, about maybe a quarter of an inch, the lifter block underneath the spring. And the whole idea, I think, was just to lift this presser foot just a little bit. Hopefully that would allow that presser foot to lift more without having so much downforce from this cam as it comes over. You can see when this rotates. Right now we're pushing the needle down. The inner presser foot is going down. And this is driving that presser foot down. When that presser foot hits the bottom here, the needle continues up. And now the outer presser foot, still binding, the outer presser foot will begin to lift because it's attached here, and this is still continuing to drive that way, pushing down, lever action lifting there. Sorry, still binding. And that's about all that it's going to lift. Now that presser foot drops, and it doesn't move a whole lot. You can see that. Down here, it's only moving just a hair. As you can see, I still have binding problems. I did loosen that set screw in here a little bit, hoping that would allow this binding to be minimized, but unfortunately it did not. Once again, I can still run it with the motor, and it will not bind up quite so badly. Let's see how that works. When you do try to run it by hand, it's very difficult to run. Appears to run a little bit smoother by motor. I'll re-oil everything in here, button it back up, put the cover on, and I'll try to run a stitch. We'll see what happens. Pretty convinced I may need a new bushing here and possible new rod. I'm hoping that's not the case, and I may opt for a lighter spring, although that's pretty loose in there right now as it is. With this presser foot adjustment, as loose as it'll go. I don't see why having a looser spring in here will do a whole lot of good, but it has been suggested. Well, I've buttoned it back up, and thought I'd run a trial stitch. Probably need to verify that I've got the thing threaded correctly, but I'll go back and look at the video that has the instructions for threading, but it seemed to run through the machine threading okay. Obviously the adjustments I made on it aren't